It is time to make over my home office, and the focal point of the entire room is my desk. I had an old desk that I built a few years ago. I loved it, but the style didn't really fit our new modern house. I decided to build a brand new waterfall style desk in a couple of days. Let's go see how I did it.
Our office was a huge mess and definitely needed some attention. I shared the whole room makeover a couple of weeks ago on my channel. I'll leave the link in the description so you can see the whole before and after. I started working on the desk from the top down.
This is an 8-foot length of butcherblock, which I found on Craigslist, Facebook, something like that. I believe it's made out of Douglas fir. It's 8 feet long and 25.5 inches wide. Typically, I'd like to use hardwood for a desktop, but this was such a good deal that we're gonna make the Douglas fir work.
I began by marking the length of the top onto my butcherblock. I wanted the desk to be a little bit smaller than the last one, so I went with 54 inches.
To make my cross cuts across the short length of my butcherblock, I'm using this little jig called the Ikea. It's made by Craig. Basically what it does is it turns a regular circular saw into a track saw. You have the track, and then you have a little sled that you mount your circular saw to, which slides along the track, giving you very clean and precise 90-degree cuts. Well, I am now on my third saw for just one cut. This is getting a bit frustrating. So we tried to use the Ikea, couldn't tilt the blade enough. Then I switched over to my Craig ACS. I could tilt the blade, no problem, but it uses a smaller blade, and so therefore I couldn't plunge deep enough to get through this 1 3/4 thick board. So now we're on to our third option, which is to use a circular saw. This is a 7 1/4 inch blade, a little bit bigger. So I can get the plunge depth, that's not a problem. It's just not the most accurate method. To try to get things a little bit more accurate, I'm actually using the ACS table and the track. I flip the track around. I'm using the back side of it just as an edge guide to run my circular saw along. I noticed on the test cut that I had a really hard time getting the blade through this thick material, so I think I'm gonna have to make a couple of passes, which also increases the odds of an inaccurate cut. Wish me luck. The first cut is made and it turned out pretty good, surprisingly. So now I need to pull this out, flip it over, make another cut. So I'm gonna be cutting out a triangular wedge, and then I'll be ready for my waterfall. Now that I finished the tricky miter cuts, it's time to cut each panel to length. That should be the easy part. I pulled back out my Craig Ikea, and we're just gonna make straight 90-degree cuts. I'm about to join my two pieces of butcherblock together to give me that waterfall edge. The problem is just a glued up miter is not a very strong joint. It's mostly end grain, so I want to put some sort of reinforcement in there. I decided my best option is to use dowels. I have a few different types of doweling jigs, but the problem is they're pretty much all designed to reference off of a 90-degree corner. I've set up a little makeshift jig using a ruler and a bunch of clamps, which will basically give me a nice straight edge so I can place my doweling jig on the 45-degree edge of the miter and then drill my dowel mortises perpendicular to that 45-degree face.
I used a 2.5 inch wood screw and a washer through the unused side of the dowel jig to secure it to the mitered wood face, just to give me a little bit of extra security and make sure that the jig wouldn't move while I drilled.
It's finally glue up time. I did a dry run with my dowels and everything seems to fit pretty well. So now the business begins. I have my horizontal panel held up actually by adjustable bar stools, pretty handy. And I did my best to try to get the panel as level as possible. I'm going to apply a healthy amount of that weldwood wood glue to both sides of the joint and then slide the vertical panel up into place and try to clamp it from both sides. The big goal of everything is to get a tight joint, yes, but also to make sure that the panels meet each other at a perfect 90-degree angle.
It's important to work quickly when you're doing a glue up, so the glue doesn't start to form a skin and potentially interfere with adhesion. I had already done a dry fit, so I knew that the two pieces of desk would fit together, but after the glue was applied, the wood began to swell slightly, so the joint needed a little bit of persuasion to get into place. Occasions like this make me really grateful that I have a bunch of heavy-duty bar clamps around. Several hours later, after the glue was fully dried, I could remove the clamps. I was happy to see my joint was pretty tight, but I did the old screwdriver trick across the top just to make everything seamless. Once the joint got a good sanding, it was looking nice and tight. Liking what you see? Tag that like button down below. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe as well.
My desktop is fully sanded, nice and smooth, so my next step now is to remove all the dust, wipe it down, typically like these microfiber cloths for that, and then I can start my staining process. Since this butcher block is made out of Douglas fir, it's technically a softwood, which means it's going to be thirsty, and softwoods have a tendency to turn out kind of blotchy when you stain them. So to try to avoid some of that blotchiness, I'm going to start with a pre-stain conditioner, and once that has had a chance to soak in, I can follow up with my oil-based stain. I also chose to use a gel stain, which isn't always necessary, especially if you use a pre-stain conditioner, but I have found that gel stains tend to blotch a little less easily on softwoods than thinner wiping stains do. I picked up this little maple filing cabinet at a local thrift store, and the plan is to use it as a bank of drawers for the right side of my desk. I chose this one because the depth is perfect. It's just about 24 inches deep, and the width is nice too, at around 17.5 inches. The only measurement that is not ideal is the height. The box portion of itself is only about 20 inches tall, not including the casters. So that means I'm going to need to add several inches in order to have the top of my desk supported at, average desk height. My plan is to add a toe kick area to the bottom and to add 4 risers to the top, which is where the desktop will actually be mounted to.
I had some scrap 8-quarter thick poplar left over from another project, probably my kitchen table or floating shelves, which I ripped down into 3-inch wide boards to construct my toe kick. I used my miter saw to cut 45-degree corners, and since I knew this piece was going to be painted, I decided the best way to assemble them together was to use glue and 18-gauge brad nails. A few strips of masking tape helped me hold the pieces together and kind of worked as a clamp before I could drive the brad nails and let the glue set up. You can check out the video description box below for links to the tools that I'm using. Once the toe kick was fully assembled, I flipped my filing cabinet over on its top and attached the toe kick to the bottom side via 3-inch long screws, which I had countersunk from the bottom. Next, I removed the top drawer from the filing cabinet so I could begin the next step, which was to add the risers.
To mount the filing cabinet to the desktop above it, I'm going to have 4 spacers. So 4 little cylinders that I will have a lag screw running through and will come up, pierce into the underside of the desk and pull everything tight. So right now I am going to make those little cylindrical risers. I've done my calculations, I've measured everything. They need to be around 4 3/8 of an inch tall. And I've decided to make them out of some leftover wood closet rod that I have. They're about 1 3/8 in diameter, and I have a lot, about this long, left over from our house. So I'm gonna go put them to work. I've got my risers all cut, my little cylinders, and now I need to drill holes all the way through so I can run my lag screws up through them. The idea is I want my hole a little bit larger than the 1/4 inch lag screws I'm going to use. That way, if there is expansion and contraction in my solid wood top, the screws will be able to very slightly move and my top won't split apart. Admittedly, my top is an engineered product, butcherblock, that's finger jointed together, so the expansion and contraction is probably going to be quite minimal. But if you plan on using solid wood boards to make your desk, this is definitely a step you don't want to skip.
I pre-drilled the designated spots through the top of the filing cabinet and then gave everything a good sand to prepare it for paint.
It is time to start applying my finishes. I'm going to start with the filing cabinet. It is going to get 1 or 2 coats of primer and then 2 coats of white paint. To apply the paint, I'm using my Fuji HVLP. It's my go-to whenever I need a really fine furniture finish.
If you haven't tried using a spray system to apply finishes to your projects, you really need to give it a shot. If you're just getting started, you don't have to invest in an expensive turbine system like the one I have. There's some pretty decent paint sprayers out there now for around $60 or $70. I promise you, the time you'll save is definitely worth the investment, and with a little bit of practice, you'll get professional results. I drove 6-inch lag screws from the inside of the filing cabinet upward and then slid on the wood dowel risers. Bryce helped me lower the desktop into place, and I used a square to check for alignment. Luckily, the lag screws that I chose to use were self-tapping, so it was easy to drive the screws into the underside of the desktop. If you're using hardwood for your desktop, I'm going to recommend pre-drill to avoid splitting. With the desk fully assembled, the last thing to do was to move it in place in the new office. I still would have loved to use hardwood for the butcherblock top, but for the price I paid, I'm really happy with how the stain turned out on the Douglas fir. If you want to see the rest of the office design, I recommend you check out the makeover video linked in the description box. I'm also working on the building plans and the how-to video for the rotating bookshelf, so let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. If you want to learn more about the modern house that we DIY'd, check out the full Building Modern on a Budget house build series. And if you like other types of DIY content, check out this video as well.
Hi, yes, I love you too. Say hello, Bobby. Okay, say hello.
Thanks for watching, guys.